for pressure and plug it into the first. So then there's undrained behavior. And this is for silts and clays, or generally anything with low permeability. In that case, we're going to say that H is the diffusion, right? It's the fluid transport in the matrix, but we're going to say that's approximately 0. That there's very little fluid dissolution under solid compression, right? So in that case, because so the pore pressure is sort of trapped in there, it doesn't have time to move or flow out of the way. So in that case, those two terms are 0, and what you get if you write down the equations is something like the second equation, something like this, and that implies that the u vector at time t equals to 0 is equal to the p vector at time t equals to 0, which is equal to the 0 vector. And so then we can integrate that equation, and we can integrate it in time so that we get this one. So this becomes our second equation, and then our system of equations become this. And this has a form or a structure. It's a saddle point problem. So if you ever solved any constrained optimization problems where you had a Lagrange multipliers here, and you had the constraint forces interacting like this. Right? So anyway, this is very much an analogy with the pressure plays the role here that it would play like an incompressible flow or something where the pressure is a constraint. So are there any fluid mechanicians here? Everybody had a fluids class? Right? So in incompressible flow, Navier-Stokes equations for incompressible flow, is the pressure a thermodynamic quantity? No, it's not. No. Incompressible flow. Right? Thermodynamically, the pressure is defined like this, right? Right? The change in internal energy with respect to a change in density. It's incompressible. The density is not changing. So the pressure must be, according to this equation, the thermodynamic pressure must be 0 or not defined.
In case of incompressible
It's not a thermodynamic quantity. So what is it? Because we sure use it. I'm talking about incompressible flow. It's in the equation. There's a P there. We call it the pressure. What is it? It's a constraint. It's a constraint. It's a Lagrange multiplier. And this is really can be seen clearly if you derive the Navier-Stokes equations from Hamilton's principle, where you incorporate a constraint equation via Lagrange multiplier. You'll see the equation you derive in the end looks exactly like the incompressible Navier-Stokes equations, but in place of the P, you have the Lagrange multiplier, which we usually use lambda for, but I guess if you wanted to use P from the beginning, you would have a P there. But it's clearly a Lagrange multiplier. And you have a set of constraint equations. And if you've ever tried to solve the Navier-Stokes equations, you know they're a huge pain. The incompressible Navier-Stokes equations are a huge pain because they're a saddle point problem, and the saddle point problems always lead to all sorts of instabilities due to bifurcations, okay? And so this equation right here is the very same thing. And this is the reason that we can't use, and we'll go into some of the mathematics behind it next time, but this is the reason we can't use equal order interpolants for U and P, because it violates something called the Imp-Sup condition if you do that. And while it always occurs in this case under undrained behavior, under drain behavior, you're probably safe. If you really wanted to use equal or interpolate under drain conditions, you're okay. Under undrained conditions, you can't do it. But even in the fully transient case up there, if you have really high rate loading, such that your solid is deforming much faster than the fluid can diffuse, you're sort of back into this undrained regime, and these instabilities can pop out. Okay. So yeah. So next time we'll talk about a little bit of the math behind the so-called INF-SUP condition and why it's important, and then because I'm going to make you program this, and you're going to have to interpolate these differently. And there's going to be some bookkeeping headache associated with that. It's not, in theory, it's not hard, but there's in a computational implementation, there's some bookkeeping headaches associated with it. And so I don't want you to just think I'm mean. I want you to understand why. And it has to do with instabilities.